Okay, so the next paper is Alejandro will be talking about who gets placed where and why.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the organizers to lead my paper with the amazing conference. So this is a paper about foster care, treatment assignment in foster care. So to start with, I think that foster care is not as a popular field yet. So foster care is a system that provides temporary care for children who have been removed from home by child protective services. And the key word here is temporary care. Now, it's sort of not that hard to motivate why we should study foster care. Most of the children that are in foster care have been abused, neglected, or abandoned. And unfortunately, it's a huge sort of number. So in the US, up to almost 6% of the children at some point in their lives are placed in foster care. On any given day, there's nearly 500,000 children in a foster home. And on average, this goes against perhaps, at least what I thought of foster care before getting involved in this, it is actually like a temporary system. So on average, children stay for about a year and a half. So they go through the system, they stay there for a few months, and then most of them go back to their original parents. So around 55% of them are reunified with their families of origin. 35% of them are adopted out of the system. Around 40% of it are adopted by former foster parents. And a small fraction, or a significant fraction, but not the majority, 10% of them are what is called emancipated. Basically, they stay in the system until they turn 18, and then they age out. The first question to ask is, why should we care about market design in foster care? So the goal, I mean, I don't have to motivate this to this audience, as all of the paper that we've seen in these days and you've seen throughout the school, is to study how the matching between children and the foster parents is done, and in things and ways that we can improve it. Okay, so the first question is, why do we want to improve something? Before fixing something, we should sort of think if it's broken or not. And the motivating problem, at least in this paper, there are many problems in foster care. The problem that I'm going to focus on this paper, that many foster children go through several foster homes before exiting foster care. Okay? And this is something that is widely recognized among social workers and people who study sort of social welfare and psychologists. That's a prevalent problem. So the majority of children experience at least one placement disruption. So they are changed from one foster home to another. Okay, so for example, here in 2015 in the US, on average, children went through 2.5 placements. I mean, and given that going into foster care is a disruption as it is to a child's life, experiencing a placement disruption has further sort of detrimental effects for children. And I mean, besides caring for children, this is something that social workers care about, and they say that they try, at least they try to minimize. Okay, and also even if in a world where even if they would wouldn't care as much for children as they say they would, well, it's in their incentives, right? Every time we need to switch a child from one foster home to another, it's a whole problem, and it involves more work for the social workers. Okay, so this is going to be a starting point of the paper. Now, the paper, I'm basically going to do two things. So the first part is to try to throw some light into how the matching is done. And the second one is how to improve it. Now, the key sort of a challenge in this market, and perhaps one of the main differences with other markets that are widely studied and we've seen for the past 2 days, is that even though it's a highly regulated market and it's centralized in the government, and the government runs the show, there is not an explicit systematic matching algorithm. Okay? Basically, there's not a rule that allows us to predict with certainty which child is going to be taken care of by which foster home. So what I do is I do a revealed preference exercise. Okay, so I'm going to look at data, matching data, and I'm going to try to rationalize what social workers are doing when they're deciding which children are being placed in which foster homes. Okay, so basically I'm looking at the placement assignment problem. And I'm going to rationalize this problem in terms of what I'm going to call a placement outcome, and this is going to be the duration of a placement, how long a child stays in a foster home, and why they leave that foster home. Okay, basically here the good outcome is leaving that foster home because they exit foster care. Okay, so that's how foster care should work. We place a child in a home and they stay there until that child exits the system. The negative outcome is when that child foster home because there was placement disruption and the child needed to change to another foster home. Now, the tricky thing of writing a model like this is that there's inherent sample selection because there's some observable heterogeneity. Clearly, social workers have way more information about children and about foster homes than we know. And if they're placing the children in foster homes thinking on what's going to work, or that's what I'm going to allow the model to capture, clearly there's going to be a sample selection problem there, and the model is going to be designed to attack this problem. Now, in terms of how to improve the system, so before that, let me tell you a little bit about the setting where I'm going to do this. So I look at Los Angeles County in California. I look at one county because foster care is administered at the county level in the US. And I look at Los Angeles for no particular reason, that I was there at that time, and also because it's the largest county stop and the county with most foster children in the US. Okay? And it's probably, you could think that it's the largest foster care system in the world. Okay? So on any given day, there's around 17,000 children in foster care in Los Angeles. And around 40 children are assigned to a foster home. Okay? This includes the children that are entering the system and the ones that are being reassigned. Now, the county is so large, if you've ever been to LA, that the way it's structured, it's divided into regions. So children are assigned to the regions where they live, where their mother lives. And then cases of children are managed by regional offices. And the county is split in 19 regional offices. Okay, so on average, 2 children are being placed every day of the week, Monday through Sunday, within a region. And this is basically the margin that I'm going to look at. The problem, we have 2 children that we need to place in foster homes on average, and why did they decide to place them at it? Okay. The data comes directly from confidential administrative records from LA County's Child Protective Services agencies. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to use 2 months of the data in 2011. So it's a little bit over 2,000 children, almost 2,300 placements. And I'm going to observe outcomes. So basically what happened to these children in these foster homes for 5 years, until 2016. So I don't really have to worry a lot about census. Okay. Now, with this setting in mind, once I have estimated the model, I'm going to look at 2 types of policies that I'm thinking are going to improve outcomes. Okay? And basically, I'm going to look at market thickness. So given the design of the system, the fact that children are being matched every day, as soon as they're into the system, into these regions, I'm going to ask, well, if we would increase market thickness, how better assignments would get. Okay? And there's 2 ways in which we could improve increase market thickness. One is temporal aggregation. What would happen if instead of matching kids every day, they would wait and they would batch, for a few days or a week, or if these regional offices would actually coordinate, talk to each other, and they would centralize assignment across the whole county. Now, before going into the model, let me tell you a little bit about the findings. So in regard to the first part, with the regional offices, I find, and roughly speaking, it's going to be very clear with some numbers what does this mean, so that social workers do a fair job when it comes to assigning children to foster homes. Okay? So the data shows that placements more likely to be disrupted are less likely to be assigned. Yeah, and this is good news. Okay? So in some sense, social workers, their behavior shows that they're minimizing disruption, and also the time that children stay in foster care. So it goes in line to the goals that they are saying they're doing. Okay, why do I say fair? Well, because there's room for improvement. Yeah, and I'm going to quantify this room for improvement. Now, in terms of the counterfactuals and the market thickness, the first finding is that delaying assignments and this temporal aggregation has close to little of no effect. Okay. And I'm going to show you this. However, the decentralization into regions seems to be suboptimal in terms that there seems to be gains there to be made. Okay? So to put some numbers here, if the regional offices would be centralized to one county, the average probability of disruption would go down up to 4.2 percentage points. And this would imply, on average, a reduction of 8% in the expected number of placements that children go through before they exit foster care. Now, one of the most surprising findings of the paper is why this is happening. And this will become clearer when I go through the model. But the main reason that this is happening is because in the counterfactual where regions are being put together, the distance between foster homes and schools is diminishing in 54%. Okay. And let me stop here for a minute, because there's several things behind this. So the first thing that the model is going to capture is that the farther away a kid is being placed from the kid's school, the more likely that placement is going to be disrupted. Okay. And the second finding is that when you centralize the regions, children are going to be placed closer to their schools. Okay. Now, the first thing you could say is that kind of doesn't make sense, right? If you have two regions and kids are being closer to their school, and you merge the regions, you would expect that if anything, they would be placed outside of the regions, and maybe across other dimensions, the matching could improve. Well, what happens is that this division into regional offices is very artificial. What this is showing is that it's very common that social workers go outside the regions, and they match kids in foster homes outside the regions. So basically, this is showing miscoordination of assignments of kids in the same day in different regional offices. And this is basically going to be the main policy implication of the paper. Okay, so the takeaway is that social workers, roughly speaking, do a decent job at matching, that the exogenous institutional design in LA County is causing inefficiencies. Okay? And in terms of improving matching, we should think in ways of improving the coordination between regions rather than the data science. Okay? And in the sake of time, I'm gonna skip the related literature. This is the outline of the model. Okay. Yes.
So you said in the beginning that we want kids to leave foster care, is that right?
Yes.
That is like an outcome, a desirable outcome.
Yes.
But do you have anything in the data that tells us whether that kid is leaving for like the good reasons? Like basically, I'm just thinking of the case in which you match the kid with a family and it's so bad, the match, that then that triggers the family of the kid to pick him up. You know what I mean? Like, how do we know whether it is desirable actually that the kid leaves foster care or not?
I mean, so the system is designed for kids to live. What you're talking, so let me get to the model. What you're talking is that so let me get back when we have the model. Okay, we'll have more language to talk about. This is important. Okay, so in terms of data, so the unit of observation is going to be a market. And a market is going to be a day in a regional office. And one thing that I haven't told you about is that relatives play a big role in foster care. Okay, so that if whenever a child goes into foster care and there's a relative available, they need to be placed with a relative. Basically, they have their own market. There's no matching program. Okay. Now, one aspect of the data that is a limitation that we only observe foster homes conditional on being matched. So in some sense, the excess supply is not observed. However, we know that it's relatively small. It's not like there are many foster homes lying around and social workers are choosing many of these foster homes that we're not observing. And the reason we know this is because children are leave on match only if there are no foster homes available. And whenever there's a foster home available, that child is going to be matched to a foster home. Okay, so to give you some numbers in terms of a description of markets, the sample period in the sample is 58 days. There's 19 regional offices. It means that there's over 1,100 office days. I mean, the majority of these office days, 90% of them, there's at least one child that needs to be matched. Okay, and this including Saturdays and Sundays. Okay, so the children need to be placed all the time. Now, and there is at least one unmatched child in 88% of these days. Okay, so it's not like these guys have a bunch of foster homes that are just lying around. Okay, and children are actually being placed as quickly as possible. So the majority of them are placed as soon as they get a placement. And the ones that wait, just wait for a few days. So the takeaway is that most children are matched right away, and unmatched children are present in almost all office days. Okay, so basically with this, I'm going to model the market at just sequential static assignment problems. Okay, so think about it as greedy matching. So let me show you some summary statistics of the data. So in terms of termination reasons, so around half of the placements in the sample are disrupted. Now from the other half, the majority of them end to the good outcome, that is a permanency. Yes.
What does remaining unmatched mean?
So remaining unmatched is that there wasn't a foster home for you for that day, and the kid usually sleeps in a shelter, and then the next day, so they weren't able to find a foster home for the kid that day.
Are you model? Excellent.
Okay. So I'm going to pull together, so that the two sort of positive outcomes that are reunification and adoption, I'm going to pull them together for practicality in permanency. So this is sort of like the good outcome. So this 40% of the placements. And in this sample, just 5% are emancipated, and as I said, censoring is not before. Okay. Now, in terms of duration, you can see here that on average, children are around 8 months, almost 8 months in a given placement. Duration, it's really correlated with the termination reasons. Okay, so placements that are disrupted are shorter. So on average, they last 5 months. And whenever a child lasts in that placement until the end, it's usually 10 months. Okay. Now, in terms of the placement characteristics, so the ones that are going to the model are a child's age. You can see here that there's well, I don't have the mean and the max here. There's children of all ages in the sample. There's going to be 4 types of foster homes. There's going to be foster homes that are contracted directly by the county. They're around 8%. The largest share are foster homes that are contracted by agencies, non-profit agencies. There's going to be group homes, and there's going to be relatives. Okay. And then one of the key variables is going to be the distance to school. And this is impressive, okay? In LA County, I mean, the first time I saw the data, I thought it was a mistake. I had to go back and ask people. So on average, children are placed 18 miles away from their school, okay? And that's a very long distance, even in LA County. Okay. Okay, so let me jump into the model. Okay, so again, the unit observation is a market. So on the left-hand side, I want to model conditional distribution of endogenous variables on exogenous variables. The exogenous variables are going to be the set of children that need a foster home on a given day in a given regional office, and the set of foster homes that are available for those children. X is going to be the characteristics of the children, the observable characteristics of the children. Y are going to be the observable characteristics of the foster homes. Okay. And the endogenous variables is going to be M, the matching, so basically who got placed where. And the two outputs, T, duration, and R, the termination reason. Now, critically, we only observe the outcomes of the placement that were assigned. And this is where the selection is going to kick in. Now, the social workers matching problem is going to be a centralized matching problem, where these guys are going to choose, I'm going to assume that every regional office has its own central planner, and they're going to choose a matching to maximize the aggregate payoff. So here V is the payoff of placing child C with foster home H. And it's going to have 3 components. The first component is going to be pi, that is what I can think of as the outcome-based payoff. Okay, so this is going to be the expected utility of the realized outcome. Okay, and the realized outcome is what these guys, this is the utility function that I want to estimate. Okay, how much from the data can I see that these guys act as if they would care what happens at the end of the placement? Okay, and this is going to have 3 key parameters. So mu is the utility of a termination reason, so whether they like placements being disrupted, they dislike them, and phi is the marginal utility of duration. And then what am I going to condition? So I'm going to condition an omega, and omega is going to be a 2-dimensional vector of unobservable characteristics, and it's going to have some distribution. And the next slide, I'm going to tell you how this omega is going to kick into the model. And I'm also going to condition on the x's and the y's that we observe. Okay.
So can I ask just a clarification question on the setting, but that speaks a little bit to the model, which is, what are the incentives of the social workers in this situation? Or how are they, what they're paid for matching kids as fast as possible? Do they have any career concerns?
So I mean, their incentives, so that they're not incentive paid. Their incentives are basically to put fires out. You know, these are social workers. I mean, you get assigned a number of kids. They're placed in foster homes, and these kids are going to have problems all the time. And you have to go drive around the city putting these fires out. Okay? And when a fire gets too big, that's going to trigger a disruption. Okay? So the incentives are, in some sense, to minimize the disruption. What it's not clear is how good at them, how good are they at being forward-looking in a sense and getting this conditional distribution right. I mean, if you go down to the office and you see how they're doing this, and they explain you how they're doing this, it's not clear that what they're doing is translated. Yes.
So the payoff doesn't depend on who else is already in the home. Like you hear things like they want to. There's 1 bedroom, so they'll need to have same gender
Yeah, this is a key simplification. So here I'm just gonna assign one-to-one matching. Yeah, that will not be siloed. Yeah, that's it. Okay, and then there might be factors that explain matching, placement assignments, other than these outcomes. And here I'm just gonna put two shocks that are gonna depend on the type of the child and home of the child. And for those of you that are familiar with Chuan Xiao, and Jeremy's talk yesterday, we saw a similar structure. We're basically, and here I'm being agnostic of whether these are sort of preference of the children, preference of the home, biases for the foster parents, whatever, right? Any other reason for which a specific child might be placed in a certain type of home, or a specific home might be assigned to a certain type of child, are going to be captured by these base shocks. So I have until 150, right?
A little bit more.
A little bit more. Okay, good. Okay, then the part that I need to tell you is how I'm going to take this expectation. Okay, so basically, where does the outcome come from? And here I'm going to assume that the the conditional distribution of outcomes is going to come from a core continuous integration model that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So this is a parametric assumption for this experiment. Now the thing is that in the data, we do not observe these omegas, right? We only observe the outcomes conditional on the matching. And the matching depends on the omegas of everyone that was present on the market that day. Okay? So the actual distribution you observe in the data is mixed by these omegas at the market level. And then the matching data, the end is effectively going to be a discrete choice over all the possible matches that they choose, mixed by these omegas. So I'm going to have a mixed program for the matching. So in terms of competing risks, for those of you that may or may not be familiar with competing risks, so this is very related to discrete choice models. So basically, we need to model how long does the process last and why does it terminate. And this works by assuming some latent durations. So basically, the risk of being disrupted, the risk of the child exiting the system into permanency, and the one that is going to determine the outcome is the minimum of these latent durations. Okay, and here I take a parametric assumption, where I'm basically assuming that conditional on the information of the central planner, these latent durations are going to follow a Bohr distribution. That this is this ugly thing here that is nonlinear. The reason here is that I basically want to have a faster rate that it's flexible enough to incorporate different forms of duration dependence. So here the alpha and the gamma parameter are going to control for this. Now, how are the omegas going to decay? And the variable here is this function k, so basically the faster rate is going to be increasing or decreasing on these omegas. So what I'm assuming that the social workers know, they have additional information about whether a placement is more likely to be disrupted or less, or the risk of a permanency it's higher or lower, that we don't observe. Okay? And this G function is here just notation. This G is known, not as in the previous paper, where basically X and Y, this is the zip code and the school and etc. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to stay a lot of time in terms of identification estimation, but basically the main argument behind the identification of the model is the exogenous variation across markets. Okay, so this is what identifies the omega, and this is an argument that has been used in sort of not the same model, but sort of similar-ish models in corporate finance. And the intuition is very akin to a sample selection model in terms of Heckman, right? So we need something that affects the probability of you being matched to a foster home that does not affect your outcome. Okay? And that is who else was placed on that same day. Okay, so basically, if there are many children being placed on that same day, or where there were different homes with different characteristics, similar to me, different to me, that's going to change my probability of being assigned, but that doesn't have anything to do with my outcome. Okay. And then I'm going to wrap everything up and estimate by simulated maximum likelihood. So conditioning on the omegas, I'm going to have a choice probability for the matching. I'm going to have a duration likelihood, and I can wrap up. Yes.
You're saying the number of other people don't have any effect on my matching, on my outcome. But what if the person in charge goes down the list and says, this guy's the best store, best home, this guy's the next best home, this guy. So then if there's more people on it, you're gonna get a worse home.
On condition, so a worse home,
Give me a home, worse means.
exactly, but then conditioning on the omega.
Well, I mean, this is now, depends on the number of other people around.
Yes. So the model is going to account for that in a sense that if we're identical children in the data, but then you were placed in a different day, then your omega in the data, even though we have the same observables, your omega is going to be different. So the model is going to.
What my omega is going to depend on how many other guys are.
Exactly. And that's what is exogenous. The fact that you went in, you need a foster home on Thursday, and I need a foster home on Monday, and on Thursday there happened to be another kid that was placed at the same time as you were placed. So even though we're identical, the model is controlling for the fact that the social worker knew different information about you than about me.
Okay, let me see what happens.
Okay. Okay, so the estimation results, so instead of showing you a bunch of estimates, a bunch of parameter estimates, I'm going to show you these are the hazard rates. So this is the thing that, I mean, in principle, if you're familiar with the pool distribution, this could be flat, increasing, or decreasing, or non-linear. And these are the estimated hazard rates for disruptions and exits. Okay? And this is quite nice and intuitive, and it's basically capturing the fact that disruptions happen quicker than the last placement of a child. And it actually has, I mean, this is, I'm not using this, I'm going to be using this for the counterfactuals, but this actually has like a nice threshold flavor to it, right? So it's like a 2-week threshold in which the risk of a disruption is maximum, then the longer a kid stays in a placement, then the disruption becomes less likely. Okay? And then, I mean, behind this, there are going to be estimates that are going to shift these hazard rates up and down, depending on the characteristics, and the omegas also. And the model is going to be estimating the variance of those omegas. Okay. Now, in terms of the utility functions, so these are the key estimates of the exercise. This is the first part. So remember, here in purple in the note, there's the utility function, in case you don't remember it. So mu is just the utility of a specific termination reason. Okay. So here we have, in the first row, there are the mu's of disruption, permanency, and emancipation. So the mu of disruption is negative and significantly different to 0. Okay, so this means that if a placement has a higher probability of being disrupted, then it's going to have a less payoff for the social worker, a lower expected utility. So that means that the probability of being assigned is going to be lower of that placement. Okay. If it has a higher probability of exiting due to permanency, it's going to have a higher probability of being assigned, and basically the emancipation is also negative. Okay? So the signs of this go in line of what social workers say that they're doing. In terms of duration, it's a similar story in the sense that conditioning on a termination reason, social workers are assigning placements to minimize the time that children stay in there. Now, conditional on permanency, this is what they are supposed to be doing, right? I mean, one of the things that is behind this is that children are being adopted by foster homes. So they're being placed in foster homes that are more likely to adopt them. Okay. Now, in terms of a disruption, this is murkier, but this is basically saying that if we know that a placement is going to be disrupted, the social worker would prefer that disruption to happen sooner rather than later. And then I didn't say this in the previous slide, I also control for the emancipation time, because basically the durations are capped at 18, right? So time means different things for children of different ages. Okay. Now, the magnitude of this coefficient allows us to compute sort of marginal rate of substitution between duration and disruption, and those are interesting. But it's hard to tell us exactly how good of a job our social workers do, right? So to understand this, what I do is that I'm going to simulate assignments under alternative matching policies. So basically, I'm going to sort of say, okay, what would happen if the parameters of the utility functions were different? This includes, for example, systematically minimizing disruptions, forgetting about the epsilons, forgetting about the eta, forgetting about duration, and just minimizing disruptions, or even maximizing them, okay? Or choosing placements at random, okay? And this is where the fairly good comes in, okay? So this is the average predicted disruption probability across all the assigned placements in the sample. So the best we can get, if social workers would actually minimize, have a computer that would estimate this model and minimize the disruption, the average disruption probability would be around 48.3%. The actual one, using the estimated parameters of the model, is around 52. Uniformly at random, 53.9, almost 54. The worst case, 68. Okay. Is this good or bad? I sincerely have no idea. I mean, sometimes I wake up and I think this is amazing. Sometimes I say, well, the space between best and actual is significant. Now, I mean, I'm not a sort of like a specialist in sort of like, but I'm an economist, I'm not a social worker. But after I went to the offices and I saw how these guys were assigning children, and after I talked with them, and I told them exactly how is the process, how does it go to your mind, what type of resources do you have, you know, the information, the directories, how they call foster homes. At least my notion is that the space between actual and random is fairly large. I mean, the moment I stepped out of that office, I thought it was going to be random at all. Because these guys, basically what they tell you is, well, you know, we're supposed to minimize this, and the story you're telling us about centralized matching and blah, 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 well, for kids, that's very nice, but in practice, we do what we can. Because there's children coming in every day into the system, and we need to find foster homes for them. Because shelters are very expensive.
What's the choice set for the social work?
So the choice set is all the possible matchings between the children and the foster homes that were matched on that day.
But I mean, do you know how many homes are available?
So this is this was yeah, sorry if that wasn't clear. So the assumption is that I do, even though I don't observe the ones that are not available. And the reason I'm making that assumption is that in almost all the days, there are children that are left unmatched. And when you talk with social workers, children are only left unmatched when there were no foster homes available.
So is there one social worker a day?
Is that one social worker?
The social worker has to work out a combinatoric of where to place the various kids?
I mean, in the model, in reality, the way it works is that it's an office. I mean, social workers, placing children is not the only thing they do. They take care of them. But what happens is that children go into a system throughout the day, I mean, up to sort of 4 p.m., 5, I mean, in the evening will only be emergency cases. Children come in and then they need to find foster homes. And then they start looking for foster homes, and it's sort of like a team effort. And then they, as they're finding foster homes, sort of they're matching children. And this is where I basically thought it was a first come, first served thing. I mean, in a sense, it could be random. But then when you ask them, well, you know, hands down, sometimes you have 5 children here. What do you do? They start telling you, well, it depends on the child. Okay, what does it mean? Well, you know, on the needs of the child. Okay, what does it mean? Well, you know, the ethnicity of the child, where does they live, the type of problems they have, the type of foster home that I've worked, my experience with the agencies, all of this soft information that I'm modeling through the omegas and in part through the Excel reports. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I think you said that on average or something, about 1 child per day is not matched.
Yes.
And so what happens to that child? Is that person matched the next day?
Yeah, exactly. So on average, they wait 6 days. But I mean, so yeah, most children are matched as soon as possible.
So I guess that speaks to the combinatorial problem about how you try and match it across days.
So this is, yeah, the assumption I do is that they're not thinking on the next day. And this is what I said, 3D matching. So they're just matching every day. And they're doing this sort of like myopically, if you want.
And in your interviews with them?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I actually, I mean, when I wrote down my second year paper, I came down from the dynamics part. I mean, what I wanted to estimate was actually the dynamic trade-off, right? So like, what's the trade-off from waiting for match quality? And then when I talked with them, basically I was, you know, you have a kid on Monday, you have foster home that's probably not very good, maybe you wait for Friday, there's a better foster home. And they told me, why would you wait for Friday? In Friday, you're gonna have another kid. And on Tuesday, they're gonna do another kid. And Wednesday, and they would never do that trade-off. And one reason is also financially. So shelters are very expensive, are much more expensive than foster.
So I guess there's a question of which kid, given that they're doing on average, what, 5 a day, did you say?
Two a day. Yeah.
Two.
Yeah.
So which one gets left out?
Yeah, exactly. And then this, I'm gonna look at the counterfactual in the counterfactual. Okay, so in terms of the counterfactuals, I'm going to look at increasing market thickness. I'm going to say, okay, what if these markets would be larger? They would be able to pool more children and more foster homes. And look at this dimension. So one is centralizing the regions. And then it's temporal aggregation. So what would happen if they would match kids every 2 days, every 3 days, every 5 days, okay? And then I'm going to do a benchmark that is matching everyone in the data set at once. So this is going to give us sort of the upper bound for all of the gains that are in the data set for market thickness. Now, one thing to mention is that this is going to be an upper bound exercise. Okay, so there are not going to be trade-offs. If you increase market thickness, things are only going to improve. The question is how much and which are going to improve more. Okay. So let's look first at temporal aggregation. So here the x-axis, I have this d variable of matching every d days. Okay, so the data is d equal to 1, okay, where the curves cross the y-axis. And here on blue, I have the average predicted termination probability. In blue is the exit one, and on red is the disruption probability. Okay. Now, as we go through the x-axis, and social workers start batching kids for 4 days, 1 week, up to 2 weeks, you see that things improve, but just slightly. Okay, so the disruption probability barely goes down. And this is, I mean, if anyone would go to the county and say, guys, you know, you're doing things wrong, match kids every 2 weeks instead of every day, they would tell you that it's crazy. The cost of this policy, it's crazy. Well, when I'm telling you this, it's not only the cost is crazy, the benefit is also very small, okay, of delaying assignment. And this also gives some indirect evidence that, I mean, there's reasons to see why they wouldn't want to involve in these dynamic trade-offs. Okay? Now, what happens when we centralize the regions? When instead of saying, well, imagine there's 19 regional offices working separately, all of them would work together in tandem, things vastly improve. Okay? So, and this is where the 4.2% comes down. Okay? So the disruption probability jumps down. And even as we start doing the two things at the same time, things don't improve anymore. And we can see this by the benchmark. So what this is telling is that all of the gains that are in the data set from increasing market thickness are coming from higher geographic thickness, not higher thickness across time. Okay? And the main driver behind this, and this is what was most surprising, is that it's the distance to school. Okay? So this is 20 miles that I show you, the y-axis. And here we can see that, you know, if we batch children across time, they're going to be placed a little bit closer to their schools. But the miscoordination comes from different regions. Okay? So what is happening is that John has his own office, I have my own office. We're scrambling for foster homes, and I find a foster home somewhere here, and John finds a foster home somewhere there, but we don't pick up the phone and call the other offices saying, well, does that actually, or I don't call John and say, yeah, I have this kid, does that actually make sense? So we could actually, there would be beneficial trades. And here is where social workers don't have incentives, because in some sense they're cannibalizing each other's foster homes. This is something that I have to circle back to it, but even when I talk with them, I mean, the first thing I asked them was, you know, how does this region work? And they told me, well, the thing is that, you know, we don't choose where foster homes are. You know, foster homes are where there are people that live that want to be foster parents, and we need to place children. And the first thing I asked was, when you place a kid, you know, far away, do you pick up the phone and, you know, you call the other offices? That, no, why not? Because, you know, once you find a foster home, you place the child and then you keep on. Okay, so to conclude, after we have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. So the objective of the paper is to formulate and estimate a structural model of foster care placement. Here I find this sort of, you know, social workers do a fair job at minimizing disruptions. So basically, a higher probability of disruption translates in a lower probability of the placement being assigned. Now, it's not great, it's better than random. There is room for improvement. However, in some sense, it speaks to the objectives of the social workers. Okay? However, thinking in the institutional design of the county, here is where there seems to be sort of a room for improvement in terms of how the regional offices coordinate assignments. And I'll stop here. Yes.
To what extent do you think the incentives of the social workers might be driven by placing people in homes, that their work consists of finding homes, and hence if there was centralization, their search effort on finding foster homes might go down? In other words, is there the potential for some kind of moral hazard problem that's being solved by decentralizing things a little bit this way?
So are you wondering of how the information aggregation part?
Suppose you told social workers to tell each other about each other's foster homes that they find to place their own kids. Would they search as hard for foster homes?
Yeah, no, probably not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
to some extent,
Yeah, to some extent,
about
yes.
the optimal
Yes, exactly.
assignment problem, I would like to take into account the incentives.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, but in that case, probably the solution is some sort of trade. So if you have a family that somebody else is going to place, then well, I'm not saying with the open.
Yeah, I mean, so actually,
that there could be a moral hazard problem, and that sets up an interesting mechanism.
Yeah. So something that I actually, yeah, and I think in the slides, is that even if we do this figure by regional office, all of them gain. So it's not like one office, it's not like it's not very efficient across offices. So these gains are substantial and are also within each regional office. Okay, so basically it is this coordination. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, or
Is there any thought about having the foster parents express preferences over the kids or anything like that?
yeah, this is a big question, right? This is the big sort of elephant in the room. What are the incentives for foster parents? So these are thinking that it's the next step of this project. So the tricky part here is that, so in difference to many other matching markets that we've looked at, here the priority is the child. Okay, so by law, foster parents are not allowed to discriminate. Okay, so you cannot say don't send me a Hispanic kid. Why? Because I just don't want to, right? However, the law also specifies cases, like as mentioned by Michael, in which you can and you actually shouldn't take care of the child. Okay, some of these cases are sort of hard constraints. So, for example, you know, in LA, kids that are older than 5 years old of different sexes cannot sleep in the family. Okay, and other cases are even softer constraints that social workers might kick in. For example, one of them is a language spoken by the kid and the family. Okay, but it's a murky area in terms of how the social workers are navigating these incentives. And this is also something interesting when I spoke with them. They know that up to some point this is happening, even though it shouldn't be happening, and social workers hate it when they smell that foster homes are sort of wanting to cherry pick kids. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.